"You'll sleep on the couch, Mom. The guest room is being renovated." Those words still echo in my mind as I sign the papers for my third property purchase on her street. My daughter had no idea that while she was making me sleep on that lumpy sofa during my visits, I was quietly buying up the houses around her. Not out of spite, though I'll admit there was a certain satisfaction in it, but because sometimes life gives you a chance to teach the most valuable lessons in the most unexpected ways. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Pierce, and for 35 years, I poured every ounce of my being into raising my daughter, Vanessa. I was barely 20 when she was born, a single mother abandoned by a boyfriend who wasn't ready for fatherhood. With no college degree and limited options, I took whatever jobs I could find, waitressing in the mornings, cleaning offices at night, and on weekends, selling handmade crafts at local markets. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, but Vanessa's future was worth every exhausted moment. Those early years blur together in my memory now, a cascade of small apartments with leaky ceilings, secondhand clothes carefully mended, and the constant calculations of how to stretch each dollar until payday. Despite these challenges, I made sure Vanessa never felt deprived. I sewed her Halloween costumes by hand, turned cardboard boxes into dollhouses, and spent hours in the public library helping with homework instead of paying for tutors we couldn't afford. By the time Vanessa was in high school, I had managed to secure a position as an administrative assistant at Hartwell Properties, a small but growing real estate firm. The pay wasn't exceptional, but it offered stability and benefits, a luxury that had previously seemed unattainable. Mr. Hartwell, the owner, was a kind-hearted widower who recognized my dedication and work ethic. I never missed a day, stayed late without complaint, and approached each task with meticulous attention. What began as a job soon evolved into something more meaningful. I learned the business from the ground up, absorbing every detail about property management, market trends, and investment strategies. Meanwhile, Vanessa blossomed into a bright, ambitious young woman. Her academic achievements earned her a partial scholarship to Westbridge University, but it wasn't enough to cover all expenses. Without hesitation, I refinanced our modest home, stretching my budget to its breaking point to ensure she could attend. "Education is the one thing nobody can take from you," I told her as we packed her dorm essentials. "This is your chance to build a life where you won't have to struggle like I did." Those college years stretched my resources paper thin. I took on additional weekend work managing properties for Mr. Hartwell, earning commissions that went straight into Vanessa's tuition fund. My social life became non-existent, my health secondary, and my own dreams perpetually deferred. But watching Vanessa graduate with honors in business administration made every sacrifice worthwhile. When she landed a prestigious position at Meridian, financial in the city, pride swelled within me. My daughter wouldn't face the hardships I had endured. She would have opportunities I could only dream of: security, respect, and the freedom that financial stability provides. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly success would change her perspective. Vanessa's transformation wasn't immediate but gradual. With each promotion and salary increase, she adopted the mannerisms and values of her colleagues, affluent young professionals from privileged backgrounds. Her calls became less frequent, her visits home increasingly rare. When she did call, our conversations centered on her achievements, her new friends, and the luxuries she was finally able to afford. "You should start thinking about retirement, Mom," she mentioned during one of our calls. "You can't keep working at that small-town agency forever." I brushed off her concern with a laugh. "Mr. Hartwell treats me well, and I enjoy what I do. Besides, I'm not ready for rocking chairs just yet." What I didn't tell her was that Mr. Hartwell had been gradually increasing my responsibilities over the years. I had obtained my real estate license and begun handling client relationships directly. More importantly, He had introduced me to his approach to property investment, identifying undervalued homes in promising neighborhoods and patiently improving them for long-term returns rather than quick flips. Eleanor, he had told me one evening as we reviewed quarterly reports, you have an intuition for this business that can't be taught. You see the potential in properties that others miss, just like you've always seen the potential in people. That conversation remained with me, a quiet validation of skills I hadn't recognized in myself. 5 years after Vanessa's graduation, life delivered 2 significant turning points within months of each other. The first was Vanessa's engagement to Thomas Bennett, a junior partner at her firm. The second was Mr. Hartwell's decision to retire. I've been thinking about this for some time, Mr. Hartwell explained as he slid a folder across his desk toward me. I have no children, no family interested in taking over the business. You've been the heart and soul of this place for almost 2 decades, Eleanor. I'd like to offer you a partnership track, with the intention of full ownership within 5 years. The proposal left me speechless. The initial investment required was substantial, but well below market value. Mr. Hartwell had structured a payment plan that would allow me to acquire the business gradually, through a combination of profit sharing and modest payments from my savings. Why me? I finally managed to ask. He smiled gently. Because you understand that real estate isn't just about properties. It's about people and their dreams. And because I've watched you sacrifice everything for your daughter's future, it's time someone invested in yours. I signed the partnership agreement the following week, beginning a new chapter I had never imagined possible. The transition period was intense, learning the financial intricacies of ownership, developing relationships with investors, and establishing my own vision for the company's future. I devoted myself to this opportunity with the same determination I had once applied to raising Vanessa alone. During this transformative period, Vanessa's wedding plans accelerated. Thomas came from a family with significant social connections, and their wedding quickly evolved from an intimate celebration into an elaborate affair designed to impress his colleagues and family friends. "We've found the perfect house, Mom," Vanessa announced over the phone. "It's in Lakeshore Heights, that exclusive community with private access to Willow Lake. Thomas's parents helped with the down payment as a wedding gift." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I replied, genuinely happy for her success while trying to ignore the subtle implication that such a home would have been unattainable without her in-laws' assistance. "You'll love it when you visit," she continued, excitement bubbling in her voice. "There's so much space. The master suite alone is probably bigger than your entire house." I laughed softly, letting the comparison slide. "I'm sure it's beautiful. I can't wait to see it." "Oh, and Mom," she added, her tone shifting slightly. "For the wedding, I was thinking about your outfit. Maybe we could go shopping together. Something more contemporary?" Thomas's mother suggested this boutique where they have wonderful options for women of yore. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Age bracket. That subtle shift in our dynamic continued through the wedding preparations. Vanessa began offering suggestions about my appearance, my modest home, even my career, though she still believed I was simply an employee at Hartwell Properties, now under new ownership. I hadn't mentioned the partnership, partly because the transition was still underway, but increasingly because I sensed that Vanessa had developed fixed perceptions about my capabilities and position in life. The wedding was as lavish as expected. I sat in the front row, watching my beautiful daughter pledge her life to Thomas, fighting back tears of both joy and a strange, unexpected melancholy. The reception that followed was a parade of wealth and connections. Thomas's family friends included bank executives, real estate developers, and local politicians. I felt distinctly out of place, especially when Thomas's mother introduced me to her circle. "This is Eleanor, Vanessa's mother," she announced with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She works as a secretary at a small property management office. Isn't it remarkable what Vanessa has accomplished, coming from such humble beginnings? I maintained my dignity, smiling graciously while accepting the backhanded compliment. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Vanessa pulled me aside. "I noticed you speaking with the Caldwells," she said, referring to a couple I had engaged in conversation during dinner. "Did you know Martin Caldwell owns half the commercial real estate downtown?" We had a lovely chat about the historical preservation projects along Riverside Avenue, I replied. He has quite an interest in architectural heritage. Vanessa's expression tightened slightly. "Just be mindful of what you say to people like that, Mom. These connections are important for Thomas's career." I kissed her cheek, choosing not to engage with the implication that I might somehow embarrass her. "You worry too much. Be happy, sweetheart. That's all I've ever wanted for you." As I drove home that night, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The daughter I had raised to be strong and independent had indeed become so. But somewhere, along the way, she had also learned to measure worth by external markers of success. And in that calculation, her perception of my value had diminished. In the months following the wedding, Vanessa and Thomas settled into their new life in Lakeshore Heights. My own circumstances were changing rapidly as I grew more comfortable in my role as partner at what was now Pierce Hartwell Properties. Mr. Hartwell remained involved as a mentor, but gradually reduced his hours, leaving me increasingly in charge of daily operations. Our business model evolved as I implemented new strategies, developing relationships with first-time homebuyers, expanding our property management services for retirees downsizing from family homes, and carefully building a portfolio of investment properties in emerging neighborhoods. My years of observing the market from behind the scenes had given me insights that proved remarkably accurate. Within 2 years, our client base had doubled, and our reputation for ethical, personalized service had spread throughout the region. My financial situation improved steadily, though I maintained my modest lifestyle. The small home where I had raised Vanessa remained comfortable and sufficient for my needs. I focused instead on building security for my future and reinvesting in the business. The only luxury I allowed myself was a reliable new car to replace my 15-year-old sedan that had finally given out. It was this new car that prompted Vanessa's first critical comment when I drove to Lakeshore Heights for dinner, 6 months after her wedding. "A Lexus, Mom? That seems like quite a splurge on your salary," she remarked as I pulled into their circular driveway. "It's practical and safe," I replied simply. And I got an excellent deal through a client at work. The dinner that followed set the tone for our evolving relationship. Thomas and Vanessa eagerly described their recent vacation to the Maldives, the country club membership they were considering, and their plans to renovate the already immaculate kitchen. When I mentioned a challenging property negotiation I had successfully navigated at work, Vanessa smiled indulgently. "It's sweet that Mr. Hartwell's new partners still value your input," she said. "So many companies these days would replace someone your age with a younger person with a business degree." I took a slow sip of water, deciding once again that this wasn't the moment to correct her assumptions. The evening concluded with them showing me around their impressive home, pointing out designer furnishings and custom features with the pride of new homeowners. When the tour reached their guest bedroom, a beautifully appointed space with a private bathroom, Thomas cleared his throat awkwardly. "We're actually converting this into a home office," he explained. "Vanessa needs a proper space for when she works from home, and I'll use it when I'm reviewing briefs on weekends." "The couch in the living room pulls out," Vanessa added quickly. "It's quite comfortable for overnight guests." I nodded, understanding the unspoken message. In their home, I was now classified as an overnight guest, rather than family deserving of dedicated space. It was a small slight, perhaps unintentional, but it stung nonetheless. That night, lying on the pull-out couch that was indeed not comfortable at all, I stared at the ceiling and contemplated how dramatically our roles had reversed. The daughter for whom I had sacrificed everything now saw me as somewhat of an inconvenience, someone to accommodate rather than welcome. The reality settled in my chest, heavy and undeniable. The following morning, as I prepared to leave, Vanessa handed me a business card. "Mom, this is Diane Hoffman, a fantastic financial advisor Thomas works with. You really should consult with her about retirement planning. I worry about you still working at your age without a solid exit strategy." I tucked the card into my purse with a noncommittal, "Thank you, I'll think about it." As I drove away from their pristine neighborhood with its manicured lawns and imposing facades, an idea began to take shape in my mind, not out of resentment, but from a growing certainty that my daughter needed to learn a lesson that my words alone couldn't convey. 2 weeks later, I received a call that would accelerate this nascent plan. It was from Martin Caldwell, the very same commercial real estate developer I had chatted with at Vanessa's wedding. "Eleanor Pierce?" His deep voice carried through the phone. "We met at your daughter's wedding. You impressed me with your insights about the Riverside Preservation Project." "Of course, Mr. Caldwell. What can I do for you?" "Please call me Martin. I've been hearing good things about Pierce Hartwell Properties. Word is you've developed quite a knack for identifying promising investments before they hit the mainstream market." Our conversation extended for almost an hour as we discussed current market trends and potential opportunities. By its conclusion, Martin had proposed a collaboration. He was diversifying into residential properties and wanted a local expert with proven instincts to help identify opportunities in exchange for participation in larger investments that would normally be beyond my reach. "I don't partner with just anyone," he explained. "But I value practical experience over prestigious degrees, and your track record speaks for itself." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. The very conversation Vanessa had worried might embarrass her had instead opened doors to opportunities she couldn't imagine I would access. The following weekend, I drove back to Lakeshore Heights, not to visit Vanessa, but to meet with a property owner who had decided to sell. The house was 3 doors down from my daughter's, a stunning colonial with waterfront access that had never formally hit the market. The owner, an elderly widow relocating to Arizona to be closer to her grandchildren, had approached our firm based on our reputation for fair, discreet transactions. As I walked the property with Martin Caldwell, calculating renovation costs and potential return on investment, I spotted Vanessa in her front yard, arranging flowers in a planter. She hadn't mentioned I should visit, and I hadn't told her I would be in her neighborhood. For a moment, I considered walking over to say hello, but something held me back. Instead, I watched as she chatted animatedly with another neighbor, gesturing toward her home with obvious pride. "Eleanor?" Martin's voice pulled me back to the present. "What do you think? The asking price is high, but I believe there's untapped potential here." I turned my attention back to the property assessment. "I agree. And I'd like to participate in this investment personally, not just as an advisor." His eyebrows rose slightly. "That would require significant capital." "I'm aware," I replied calmly. "I have resources set aside for the right opportunity. This qualifies." That afternoon, we made an offer on the property. To my daughter, I would still be the mother who worked as a secretary at a small real estate office, the woman relegated to the uncomfortable couch during visits. But in reality, I was becoming something entirely different, a silent investor in the very neighborhood she believed was beyond my reach. As spring turned to summer, our first joint venture with Caldwell Investments progressed rapidly. The Colonial underwent careful renovations, preserving its historical character while updating systems and amenities to meet luxury standards. I visited the property regularly, sometimes glimpsing Vanessa and Thomas going about their daily routines, oblivious to my growing stake in their exclusive community. During this period, my relationship with Vanessa continued its subtle deterioration. Our phone calls grew shorter and less frequent. When I did visit their home, still sleeping on that uncomfortable couch, the conversation increasingly revolved around their social ascent and subtle suggestions about how I should prepare for retirement. Thomas and I were discussing your situation, Vanessa mentioned during Sunday brunch on their patio. There's a lovely retirement community just outside the city, Sunshine Meadows. Very affordable, with activities and care available as needs. Change. I added honey to my tea, keeping my expression neutral. That's thoughtful, but I'm not looking to make any changes right now. Mom, she sighed with exaggerated patience, you need to be realistic. That job won't last forever, and your house will eventually become too much to maintain. It's better to plan ahead than to wait for a crisis. Thomas nodded in agreement. My grandmother resisted moving to assisted living until she fell and broke her hip. The transition was much harder after that. I smiled politely. I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite capable of managing my affairs. Vanessa exchanged a look with Thomas. That particular look couples develop when they share an unspoken thought about someone else's delusion. It was patronizing in its quiet dismissal of my autonomy, and it solidified my resolve to continue the path I had started down. The following month brought an unexpected development. The property directly across the street from Vanessa and Thomas's house suddenly came on the market following the owner's divorce. Martin called me immediately. It's not in our planned acquisition timeline, he admitted, but the location is prime, and the circumstances suggest we might secure it below market. Of course, I didn't hesitate. Let's make an offer, and I'd like to take a larger percentage in this one. This purchase was different from the first. I wasn't just an investor in a Caldwell project. I was taking the lead, with Martin as my partner, rather than the other way around. By this point, Mr. Hartwell had fully retired, leaving me as the principal, owner of our now thriving agency. My financial position was stronger than ever, though I maintained my modest public persona. The renovations on this second property coincided with Vanessa and Thomas's first anniversary. They hosted an elaborate garden party for their closest friends, primarily colleagues and connections from Thomas's social circle. I received an invitation, though Vanessa called to explain that it would be a younger crowd, so don't feel obligated to attend if it seems too tiring. I decided to go, arriving in my now 2-year-old Lexus that still drew the occasional comment about my splurging. The party was in full swing when I arrived, the backyard transformed with twinkling lights, a hired bartender mixing signature, cocktails and catering staff weaving through the crowd with trays of appetizers that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a month. Vanessa greeted me with an air kiss, quickly introducing me to a few guests before being pulled away by Thomas's boss. I circulated on my own, engaging in pleasant conversation with those who didn't immediately dismiss me as irrelevant to their networking objectives. Eventually, I found myself near a group discussing property values in the neighborhood. The Richardson's place sold for $2 million, and it needed significant updates, a woman in an expensive silk dress was saying. The market here is insane. Did you see they're renovating the Johnston house across the street? Another guest added. Apparently some investment group bought it. I heard they're planning to turn it into a luxury rental. Thomas joined the conversation, wine glass in hand. Not ideal for the neighborhood? We've worked hard to maintain a certain community standard here. I sipped my drink silently, suppressing a smile. If only they knew that the investment group they were discussing was primarily me, with Martin as a secondary partner. The luxury rental rumor was entirely fabricated. We were actually creating a showcase home that would eventually sell for substantially more than Thomas and Vanessa had paid for their property. As the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly relegated to the periphery of the gathering. When I overheard Vanessa explaining to someone that I worked in an office and lived in a quaint older neighborhood, I decided it was time to leave. I approached to say my goodbyes, finding her deep in conversation with a designer discussing plans to update their primary bathroom. "Leaving already?" she asked, checking her watch. "It's still early." "It's been lovely, but I have an early meeting tomorrow," I explained. "On a Sunday?" Thomas questioned skeptically. I nodded. The real estate market doesn't observe weekends, especially for promising properties. Vanessa laughed lightly, turning to her friend. "Mom helps coordinate viewings at her office. She's very dedicated." I let the mischaracterization stand, kissing her cheek before departing. As I walked to my car, I paused to look back at their beautiful home, with its gathering of successful young professionals and carefree display of prosperity. Then I glanced across the street to the property I now controlled, a reminder of the lesson that was gradually taking shape. That night, I called Martin Caldwell. "I want to look at the Henderson property," I told him without preamble. "The one next door to your daughter?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "It's not even on the market." "Not officially, but James Henderson mentioned to me at the community business lunch last month that he's considering relocating to Boston for work. Make him an offer, above market value. I want this one secured without competition." "Eleanor," Martin said slowly, "that would be 3 properties within a stone's throw of your daughter's home. I have to ask, what exactly are you planning here?" I paused, considering how to articulate the complex emotion driving this unusual investment strategy. "Let's call it a lesson in perspective," I finally replied. "Sometimes people need to see something tangible to recognize the truth that's been in front of them all along." He chuckled softly. "Well, it's your money, and these are solid investments regardless of your motivation. I'll reach out to Henderson tomorrow." Within 2 weeks, we had secured the 3rd property, the one directly adjacent to Vanessa and Thomas's home. This acquisition was impossible to keep entirely quiet, given its proximity. The neighbors naturally discussed the unexpected sale, and rumors began circulating about the mysterious buyer consolidating properties in the exclusive community. I maintained my distance, allowing speculation to build while focusing on my expanding business. Pierce Properties, I had dropped Hartwell from the name following his full retirement, was now managing over 200 rental units and had developed a reputation for ethical practices and innovative approaches to community development. I had hired 2 promising young agents and a property manager, creating a small but effective team that allowed me to focus on investment strategy rather than day-to-day operations. My personal wealth had grown substantially, though I continued to live modestly, my primary indulgence being regular contributions to a scholarship fund I had established at the community college for single parents pursuing education. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could now easily fund multiple students through the same struggles I had faced alone. As autumn approached, renovations on all 3 Lakeshore Heights properties neared completion. I had personally overseen many of the design decisions, creating distinctive, sophisticated spaces that reflected my own carefully developed aesthetic rather than following trendy design magazines. These homes represented not just financial investments, but extensions of my vision, proof of capabilities that my daughter had never recognized I possessed. It was during this period that Vanessa called with news that might once have been shared differently. "Mom, I'm pregnant," she announced with obvious excitement. "We just got confirmation yesterday, due in early spring." Joy surged through me, momentarily eclipsing all other considerations. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. How are you feeling?" "A little morning sickness, but otherwise great. We're converting the home office into a nursery. Thomas will just use the den for work instead." The implication hung unspoken between us. The guest room that had been converted to a home office would now become a nursery, further cementing my status as the relative accommodated on the couch during increasingly infrequent visits. "We'll need to discuss childcare arrangements," she continued. "Thomas's mother has offered to help 2 days a week, and we're researching the best nanny agencies for the remaining time." I hesitated before responding. I could certainly help. As well, if you'd like. My schedule has some flexibility these days. The silence that followed spoke volumes. That's sweet, Mom, but we're looking for someone with professional training in early childhood development. Besides, it's a significant commitment. And at your age, taking care of an infant might be more physically demanding than you realize. I let the comment pass without challenge, congratulating her again before ending the call. As I set down the phone, I realized the time had come to reveal what I had been building, not out of spite or revenge, but as a necessary correction to a fundamental misunderstanding about who I was and what I had become. The opportunity presented itself the following weekend when Vanessa called in obvious distress. "Mom, you won't believe what's happening. Someone's bought Mr. Henderson's house next door, and they're converting the entire back garden into some kind of entertainment area with a massive pool and outdoor kitchen. The construction noise is going to be unbearable, especially after the baby comes." "That sounds disruptive," I replied calmly. "Have you tried speaking with the new owners?" "No one can reach them. Everything goes through some property management company. Thomas is furious. He's talking about getting the homeowners association involved." She paused, then continued with growing agitation. "And that's not all. The two houses across the street have been bought by the same investor. There are rumors they might be converted into high-end vacation rentals, which would completely change the character of the neighborhood." "Perhaps I could help," I offered. "I do have some experience with property matters." Vanessa's laugh held a note of condescension. "Thanks, Mom, but Thomas is already consulting with a real estate attorney. This requires someone who understands luxury property regulations." "Nevertheless," I pressed gently, "I'm in the area tomorrow for a meeting. Why don't I stop by and you can show me what's happening? Sometimes a fresh perspective helps." She agreed reluctantly, clearly humoring what she perceived as my desire to feel useful. The stage was set for the revelation I had been carefully orchestrating for months. The following afternoon, I pulled up to Vanessa and Thomas's home in T. My usual Lexus, which now seemed almost modest compared to the luxury vehicles that filled the driveways along Lakeshore Heights. Vanessa met me at the door, her expression pinched with worry as she led me straight through the house to their back patio. From there, we had a clear view into the neighboring property, the Henderson house that I had purchased just weeks earlier. Construction equipment dotted the expansive backyard, and workers moved purposefully about, measuring and marking areas for what would indeed become a stunning outdoor entertainment space. "See what I mean?" Vanessa gestured emphatically. "They've torn out all of Mrs. Henderson's beautiful rose gardens. James said his mother spent 30 years cultivating those specific varieties. The new owners just ripped everything out without a second thought." Her voice caught slightly, and I was surprised to detect genuine emotion beneath her indignation. "It's not just about the noise or property values. It's about respecting the neighborhood's history." I nodded thoughtfully, studying her expression. This was unexpected, a glimpse of the compassionate daughter I had raised, concerned about something beyond appearances or convenience. "The roses meant something to you?" Vanessa's hand moved unconsciously to her slightly rounded abdomen, a protective gesture that stirred something profound in me. Mrs. Henderson used to let me help her tend them when I first visited Thomas's parents in this neighborhood years ago. She told me stories about each variety. I always thought when we had children, they might do the same. For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt about my elaborate plan. Then Thomas emerged from the house, phone in hand, his expression hardening as he surveyed the construction next door. "I've left 3 messages with their management company," he announced irritably. "They won't even tell me who the actual owner. Is it just some generic response about respecting the privacy of their clients?" He noticed me and added with barely concealed condescension, "Hello, Eleanor. I'm afraid this is rather beyond what you'd be familiar with in your line of work." And just like that, my resolve returned. "Perhaps," I replied mildly. Though, real estate disputes follow similar patterns regardless of price point. Thomas smiled thinly. This isn't a dispute over a fence in a subdivision. This is about maintaining standards in a premier community. He turned to Vanessa. The Caldwell Group is behind this. I'm certain of it. They've been buying up properties all over the Lake District. Caldwell Investments, I corrected quietly. Both turned to me, surprised. What? Thomas asked. The company is called Caldwell Investments, not the Caldwell Group. And they typically focus on commercial properties, though they've been diversifying recently. Thomas's brow furrowed. How would you know that? I shrugged lightly. I read the business section. Before he could respond, I added, would you mind if I made a few calls? I might have a contact who could provide some information. Vanessa exchanged a skeptical glance with Thomas. Sure, Mom. The landline is in the kitchen if you need it. My cell is fine, thank you, I replied, stepping back into the house. Once in the privacy of their immaculate living room, I dialed Martin's number. Those roses were important to my daughter, I said without preamble when he answered. Martin chuckled. Hello to you too, Eleanor. Which roses are we discussing? The Henderson property. Apparently, the previous owner's rose garden had sentimental value to Vanessa. Ah, I see. And now you're feeling guilty about your little object lesson? I sighed, watching through the window as Thomas gestured animatedly toward the construction, while Vanessa nodded in agreement. Not guilty, exactly. Just reconsidering certain details. Well, it's your project. We could certainly incorporate a rose garden into the new landscaping plan. The garden designer would probably welcome the direction, actually. Have the original plants been destroyed? No, they've been carefully potted and moved to the greenhouse at River Valley Nursery. Standard procedure for any significant landscaping we remove. We always evaluate for potential reuse or donation. Relief washed over me. Good. Please instruct the team to incorporate as many of the original roses as possible, particularly along the shared property line. Consider it done. Anything else? I hesitated, then made a decision. Yes, it's time to move forward with Phase 2. Please have Diane prepare the disclosure documents we discussed. Are you sure, once this is in motion? I'm sure, I confirmed, watching as Thomas placed a protective arm around Vanessa's shoulders. Some lessons need to be learned completely, not halfway. After ending the call, I rejoined them on the patio, where Thomas was now photographing the construction activity with his phone. Documentation for the Homeowners Association, he explained tersely. Any luck with your contact? Vanessa asked, her tone making it clear she expected nothing useful. Actually, yes. I've learned that the rose garden wasn't destroyed. The plants have been preserved at a local nursery. Thomas lowered his phone, surprised. How did you find that out? As I mentioned, I do have some experience in property matters. I paused, then added, I also took the liberty of requesting that many of the original roses be incorporated into the new landscape design, particularly along your shared boundary. Vanessa's eyes widened. You... What? How? Let's just say I spoke with someone who could convey the message appropriately. Thomas scoffed. And you expect us to believe that the owner, whoever they are, will simply accommodate this request from a complete stranger? I smiled serenely. I guess we'll find out. The skepticism on their faces was unmistakable, but I noticed Vanessa studying me with newfound curiosity. Good. The first seed of doubt about her perceptions had been planted. My phone chimed with a text message. I should go, I said, checking the screen. I have another appointment, but I'll check back tomorrow to see if there's been any progress with the rose situation. As I drove away, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, satisfaction at the beginning stages of my plan, coupled with a genuine desire to preserve something that clearly mattered to my daughter. Perhaps this would be more nuanced than the simple lesson in humility I had initially envisioned. The following morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual. Pierce Properties now occupied a renovated historic building downtown, a far cry from the modest strip mall location where I had started with Mr. Hartwell decades earlier. My assistant, Melissa, greeted me with a stack of messages and a knowing smile. Diane Hoffman called from Caldwell Investments, she informed me. The documents you requested are ready for review, and the landscape architect for the Henderson property sent over revised plans for your approval. Apparently, there's been a special request regarding rose gardens. I accepted the messages with a nod. Thank you. I'll review everything this morning. Any word from River Valley Nursery about the condition of the transplanted roses? Their lead horticulturist sent an email. They've assessed all specimens and most are in excellent condition. They're recommending a specific feeding regimen to minimize transplant shock. Wonderful. Please arrange for their recommended treatment, regardless of cost. Those plants are more valuable than they appear. Melissa raised an eyebrow. This seems like a lot of attention for landscaping on an investment property. I smiled. Sometimes the true value of an investment isn't reflected in the financial statements. The morning passed in a flurry of activity, client meetings, project updates, and detailed review of the disclosure documents Diane had prepared. By early afternoon, everything was in place for the next stage of my plan. I called Vanessa. I was wondering if I might stop by again today. I've heard some news about the Henderson property that might interest you. Her response was warmer than I expected. Actually, we were going to call you. Something strange happened this morning. The construction manager came over personally to discuss the landscaping plans with us. He showed us drawings that include a rose garden along our property line, using many of Mrs. Henderson's original plants. He said they received special instructions from ownership to preserve as much of the original garden as possible. That's wonderful news, I replied, hiding my smile. Mom, Vanessa's voice dropped to a near whisper. How did you do this? Thomas is completely baffled. He says no developer makes changes like this overnight based on a stranger's request. Perhaps they're more reasonable than Thomas assumed. I'll explain when I see you. When I arrived at their home an hour later, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Thomas greeted me with grudging respect, his previous condescension tempered by confusion. Vanessa led me to their kitchen, where landscape plans were spread across the marble island. Look, she pointed to the detailed drawings. They're not just keeping some of the roses, they're creating an enhanced garden with benches and a small pathway. The construction manager said they're even researching the history of each variety to create small plaques with their names and origins. I examined the plans approvingly. Martin had exceeded my expectations. The rose garden design was exquisite, respectful of tradition while incorporating modern elements that would complement both properties. This is quite impressive, I agreed. Much more than I anticipated. Thomas crossed his arms, studying me intently. That's just it, Eleanor. None of this makes sense. Construction firms don't halt progress to accommodate sentimental requests from neighbors, especially in developments of this caliber. Something doesn't add up. I met his gaze steadily. Perhaps there's more to the situation than you realize. What does that mean? He pressed. What exactly did you do? Who did you call yesterday? I glanced between them, measuring the moment. Was it time for the full revelation, or should I continue the gradual approach? Vanessa's expression, open, curious, without the dismissive edge I'd grown accustomed to, helped me decide. I spoke directly with Martin Caldwell of Caldwell Investments, I said simply. Thomas barked a short laugh. Right. You just happened to have the direct number for one of the region's most prominent developers, a man who doesn't take meetings without weeks of advance notice. I didn't need advance notice. Martin and I have been working together for some time now. Vanessa's brow furrowed. Working together? I don't understand. I took a breath, then decided to reveal just enough to shift their perceptions without showing my full hand. My role at Pierce Properties is not what you've assumed. I'm not just an employee. I'm the owner. Mr. Hartwell retired 3 years ago and transferred ownership to me through a structured partnership agreement. The stunned silence that followed was deeply satisfying. Thomas recovered first, his expression cycling rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and calculation. Pierce Properties, he repeated slowly. The sign outside said Pierce, but I assumed it was a coincidence. You're telling me you own a real estate company? Yes, we specialize in property management and selective investments. Martin Caldwell and I have collaborated on several projects over the past 2 years, including, as it happens, the Henderson property next door. Vanessa sank onto a kitchen stool, her eyes wide. You're involved with the development next door? How? Why didn't you tell us? I shrugged lightly. You never asked about my work beyond assuming I was still in the same position I held when you were in college. Whenever I mentioned developments at the office, you changed the subject or made comments about retirement planning. The truth of this statement hung in the air between us. Thomas's expression had grown guarded, reassessing me with the wariness of someone who realizes they've severely miscalculated. So you're what, a silent partner in these local developments? He asked carefully. In some cases, I replied, deliberately vague. In others, I take a more active role in the investment and design decisions. But your house, Vanessa interjected, still processing. Your car, your lifestyle, none of it suggests. Success? I finished for her. Perhaps I don't measure success by the same external markers that you do. I've always valued financial security over displays of wealth. Thomas cleared his throat, clearly recalibrating his approach. This is surprising information, Eleanor. Very impressive. Perhaps we should discuss potential opportunities for collaboration. My firm represents several development interests that might benefit from local expertise. The naked opportunism in his pivot might once have hurt me. Now, it merely confirmed what I had long suspected about my son-in-law's character. That's kind of you to offer, Thomas. However, my investment strategy is quite selective. I partner only with individuals who demonstrate consistent ethical practices and genuine respect for communities. His smile faltered at the implicit rebuke. Vanessa, meanwhile, seemed lost in thought, processing this revelation about the mother she had so thoroughly underestimated. The other properties, she said suddenly, the ones across the street that everyone's been speculating about, are those yours too? I have interests in several properties in this neighborhood, I acknowledged, all obtained through legitimate investment channels. Thomas's phone rang, sparing him from having to respond. He excused himself to take the call, leaving Vanessa and me alone in the kitchen. She studied me with new eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I don't understand why you kept this from me, she said quietly. We're family. The hurt in her voice was genuine, which surprised me. I had expected indignation, perhaps embarrassment, but not pain. When exactly should I have told you, Vanessa? When you were suggesting I apply for work in a retirement home? When you were explaining that I wasn't qualified to help with my own grandchild? Or perhaps during one of your explanations about how people my age should prepare for irrelevance? My words were sharper than intended, carrying the accumulated weight of 1,000 small dismissals. Vanessa flinched, tears welling in her eyes. I never meant to make you feel, she began. Unimportant? Incapable? These weren't just feelings, Vanessa. They were conclusions based on your direct statements and actions. She wiped at her eyes. But why buy properties here, in our neighborhood? Was that some kind of test? I considered the question carefully. Not a test exactly. More of a reality adjustment. You and Thomas have created a narrative about who I am and what I'm capable of that bears little resemblance to the truth. I could have corrected you with words, but experience has taught me that some lessons require more tangible demonstrations. Thomas returned before she could respond, his expression tight with forced pleasantry. That was the office. I'm afraid I need to handle an urgent client matter. He turned to me with newfound deference. Eleanor, we should continue this conversation soon. Perhaps dinner next week? I'd love to hear more about your business ventures. That would be lovely, I replied, recognizing the calculated reassessment behind his invitation. Though I should warn you, I have a rather full calendar these days. Investment properties require considerable attention, especially in the early stages. After I left, I drove not home but to the colonial property 3 doors down from Vanessa's, the first Lakeshore Heights house I had acquired. The renovations were complete, and I had taken to spending occasional evenings there, enjoying the peaceful lakefront view while considering my next steps. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into a comfortable chair by the windows, reflecting on the day's partial revelations. Vanessa's reaction had surprised me, less calculating than Thomas's, more genuinely affected by the realization that she had misjudged me so thoroughly. Perhaps beneath the polished exterior of the woman she had become, traces remained of the empathetic daughter I had raised. My phone rang. Martin Caldwell. I've just had a most interesting call, he greeted me, amusement evident in his tone. Thomas Bennett reached out to my office, practically tripping over himself to schedule a meeting. Apparently, he's recently discovered our connection and has some mutually beneficial opportunities to discuss. I laughed softly. I imagine he does. I take it the first phase of your plan is underway? Partially. I've acknowledged my position at Pierce Properties and my professional relationship with you, but I haven't revealed the full extent of my investments yet. Ah, saving the grand finale? Martin chuckled. Well, I've arranged for the rose garden to be expedited. The specimens are being prepared for replanting tomorrow, with the installation scheduled for Friday. I've also instructed the team to temporarily pause the more disruptive construction activities near the shared property line, a goodwill gesture toward your daughter during her pregnancy. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate your flexibility with this rather unorthodox situation. Eleanor, in 30 years of development, I've learned that the most interesting projects always involve human elements more complex than blueprints and balance sheets. Besides, your investment strategies have proven remarkably sound. I'm content to accommodate some personal considerations alongside our business objectives. After we ended the call, I remained by the window, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of amber and gold. The truth was, I had never intended this plan to be vindictive. My goal wasn't to humiliate Vanessa or Thomas, but to shatter the false constraints they had placed around their understanding of me, constraints that limited not only their perception of my capabilities, but also their own imaginations about what was possible beyond conventional paths to success. The following morning, I arrived at my office to find an elegant floral arrangement on my desk. Orchids, not roses, in a tasteful contemporary design. The card read simply, "Looking forward to learning more about Pierce Properties. Dinner Thursday? Thomas and Vanessa Bennett." Melissa raised an eyebrow as she delivered my morning coffee. Impressive flowers? Special occasion? Just a small family reconciliation in progress, I replied. Please call Vanessa Bennett and confirm dinner. On Thursday. Also, arrange for the Henderson property landscaping documentation to be messengered to their home today. The complete designs, including the historical background on each rose variety. And include a note that I've authorized expedited installation to be completed before the weekend. Of course. Melissa hesitated, then added with a smile, Your daughter has no idea who she's dealing with, does she? I returned the smile. She's beginning to suspect. The days leading up to Thursday's dinner were filled with subtle shifts in my relationship with Vanessa. She called twice, ostensibly about dinner arrangements, but the conversations lingered, touching on topics we hadn't discussed in years. During our second call, she asked tentatively about my journey from assistant to owner at Pierce Properties. It must have been challenging, she ventured. Taking over a business at a point when most people are thinking about scaling. Back. Age, you mean? I replied frankly. I was 53 when Mr. Hartwell offered me the partnership track, 56 when I assumed full ownership. Hardly ancient, though I suspect from your perspective, it seemed improbably late for such a significant career evolution. She had the grace to sound embarrassed. I guess I've absorbed some limiting perspectives about career trajectories. In my industry, they practically push you toward management by 40 or suggest you've peaked. Different fields, different timelines, I observed. Real estate rewards experience and relationship building over rapid advancement. The most successful investors I know achieved their greatest returns in their 60s and 70s. I never considered that, she admitted. I've been so focused on early achievement, checking the expected boxes ahead of schedule. A natural consequence of the environments you've chosen, I said gently, but worth examining whether those timelines serve your actual goals or just external expectations. The conversation had ended with an unfamiliar warmth, a tentative bridge extending across the chasm that had formed between us. Still, I harbored no illusions that one revelation and a few thoughtful exchanges could undo years of accumulated misperceptions. Thursday's dinner would determine whether this was merely a temporary adjustment to unexpected information or the beginning of a more fundamental reassessment. I spent Wednesday at the Henderson property overseeing the preliminary work for the Rose Garden installation. True to Martin's word, the construction team had pivoted to focus on this element first, carefully preparing the soil and irrigation systems according to the horticulturist's specifications. From my position near the property line, I occasionally glimpsed Vanessa watching from her kitchen window, her expression thoughtful. Mid-afternoon, she emerged with a tray holding a pitcher of iced tea and 2 glasses. After a moment's hesitation, she approached the low decorative fence separating our properties. "You look like you could use a break," she called. "It's unseasonably warm today." Surprised by the gesture, I made my way over to her. She poured 2 glasses, handing one to me across the fence. A simple action that suddenly seemed weighted, with symbolic significance. "Thank you," I said, accepting both the drink and the olive branch it represented. "The garden is already taking shape," she observed, nodding toward the meticulously prepared beds. "They're working so quickly." Quality. Landscaping is as much about proper preparation as the plantings themselves, I explained. These beds are being prepared with specialized soil compositions for each rose variety, adjusting for acidity, drainage, and nutrient requirements. Vanessa listened with genuine interest, a far cry from the polite indulgence that typically characterized her responses to my comments. I didn't realize so much science was involved. Mrs. Henderson made it seem effortless. Years of experience often make complexity appear simple, I observed, the statement extending beyond gardening to life itself. She caught my meaning, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "I'm beginning to understand that." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping tea and watching the workers. Then Vanessa asked the question I had been expecting since our initial revelation. "The other properties, how many do you actually own in Lakeshore Heights?" I met her gaze directly. 3, currently. The Henderson house, where we're standing now. The colonial 3 doors down that was the Wilsons' home, and the contemporary across the street that belonged to the Delaney family. She exhaled slowly, processing this information. "So, effectively, you own almost half the properties on our cul-de-sac. Properties worth approximately $12 million collectively after renovations," I supplied calmly. "Though market value is always somewhat theoretical until tested by an actual sale." Her grip tightened slightly on her glass. "And do you plan to sell them?" "Eventually, though I'm in no hurry. The market for luxury properties in this area continues to appreciate steadily." Vanessa nodded, her financial acumen allowing her to understand the investment strategy, even as she struggled with its personal implications. "Does Thomas know? About all 3 properties, I mean." "Not yet. I thought I'd save that detail for dinner tomorrow." I paused, then added more gently, "This wasn't meant to be a cruel surprise, Vanessa. Just a necessary correction to some persistent misconceptions." She brushed a strand of hair from her face, her expression complicated. "I keep thinking about all those comments I made. About retirement planning, about you working too hard. At your age. About the guest room. God, the guest room." She closed her eyes briefly. "I converted your space into a home office because I genuinely believed you couldn't afford a decent place to live in your retirement. I thought I was being subtle about creating a contingency for when you inevitably needed to move in with us." The admission stunned me. I had interpreted the guest room conversion as exclusion, when in fact, it had been Vanessa's misguided attempt at preparation, anticipating a future need based on her flawed assessment of my circumstances. "You were trying to plan for taking care of me," I said slowly. "Badly, apparently," she acknowledged with a rueful smile. "With a lot of insulting assumptions about your capabilities. But yes, that was the general idea." This revelation shifted my understanding of our recent history. The patronizing suggestions about retirement communities, the financial advisor referrals, even the comments about my physical ability to care for an infant, all stemmed from a genuine, if misguided, concern about my future security. "I've never needed taking care of, Vanessa," I said quietly. "Not financially, at least." "I'm starting to see that." She hesitated, then added, "But maybe I needed to believe you did. It gave me a role, a way to feel I was repaying some fraction of what you gave me growing up." This insight into her psychology caught me off guard. I had been so focused on challenging her misconceptions about me that I hadn't considered how those very misconceptions might have served her emotionally, providing a framework for reciprocity in a relationship where the scales had been tipped in one direction for so long. Before I could formulate a response, one of the landscape workers approached, needing guidance on the placement of a decorative trellis. I excused myself, promising to continue our conversation at dinner the following evening. That night, as I reviewed the disclosure documents Diane had prepared for the final phase of my plan, I found myself reconsidering my approach. The conversation with Vanessa had revealed layers of complexity in our relationship that I hadn't fully appreciated. Her dismissiveness, which I had interpreted as pure condescension, contained elements of misplaced protectiveness. The question now was whether this new understanding should alter my intended course. After careful consideration, I decided to proceed with my original plan, not out of stubbornness, but because the fundamental lesson remained necessary. Vanessa needed to see me completely, not partially, to understand the full extent of what I had built while she was underestimating my capabilities. Only then could we establish a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than perceived obligation or inverted caretaking roles. Thursday evening arrived, and I prepared for dinner with particular care. I selected a simple but elegantly tailored dress I had purchased during my last business trip to Chicago, classic in design, but clearly of exceptional quality. My jewelry remained minimal, as always, but I added a pair of sapphire earrings that had been my first significant purchase after the Hartwell partnership was finalized. I arrived at precisely 7, noting with private amusement that both Vanessa and Thomas seemed uncharacteristically nervous as they welcomed me. The dining room had been arranged with obvious attention to detail, their best china, fresh flowers, candles flickering in silver holders that I recognized as wedding gifts they rarely used. "The house looks lovely," I remarked as Thomas offered me a glass of wine. "We wanted tonight to feel special," Vanessa replied. It's not every day we discover my mother is a secret real estate mogul. Her tone was light, but the undercurrent of remaining confusion was evident. Thomas, meanwhile, had adopted a deferential manner that bordered on obsequious, a stark contrast to his previous condescension. Hardly a mogul, I demurred. Just someone who recognized opportunities others overlooked. Like the opportunities in this neighborhood? Thomas ventured carefully. I must admit, I'm curious about your investment strategy. The properties you've acquired have specific placement advantages within Lakeshore Heights. I smiled, appreciating his attempt to frame my purchases as purely strategic rather than personally motivated. Location is always a primary consideration in real estate. Corner lots, waterfront access, southern exposures, these features consistently command premium values. He nodded eagerly. Exactly what I was thinking. The Wilson Colonial has that spectacular lake frontage, and the Delaney Contemporary sits at the entrance to the cul-de-sac with unobstructed sunset views. Very strategic acquisitions. Dinner progressed with similar conversational dance steps, Thomas working to establish common ground on professional terms, Vanessa watching our interaction with thoughtful eyes, and me allowing the evening to unfold at its own pace. The tension gradually eased as we shared an excellent meal prepared by a personal chef they had hired for the occasion, another sign of the importance they had attached to this reconciliation. As we finished the main course, Thomas broached the subject I had been anticipating. Eleanor, I hope you won't think this presumptuous, but I've been giving some thought to potential synergies between your property interests and some of the clients my firm represents. There could be mutually beneficial opportunities for development, partnerships beyond Lakeshore Heights. I'm always open to exploring viable investment options, I replied neutrally. Though I should mention that my current portfolio is quite specific in its focus and requirements. Of course, he hastened to agree. I simply thought that with your local expertise and our clients' capital resources, there might be room for expansion into larger-scale projects. I took a deliberate sip of wine before responding. Actually, Thomas, I've recently begun a rather significant expansion myself, which brings me to something I've been meaning to discuss with both of you. Vanessa straightened slightly, her expression alert. Thomas leaned forward, eager for what he clearly assumed would be an invitation to participate in a new business venture. As you know, I've acquired 3 properties in Lakeshore Heights, I began. What you may not realize is that these acquisitions are part of a broader initiative I've been developing over the past year. I reached for my handbag, removing a slim leather portfolio that contained the documents Diane had prepared. Pierce Properties has recently established a new division focused specifically on community-centered housing developments. Our first project involves creating integrated living spaces that combine luxury residences with thoughtfully designed multi-generational facilities. Thomas's expression faltered slightly, uncertain where this was heading, but maintaining his interested smile. Vanessa watched me with growing curiosity. The Henderson property will serve as the model home for this concept, I continued, opening the portfolio and removing a set of architectural renderings. As you can see, we've designed it to showcase how elegant, high-end residences can incorporate features that support aging in place without sacrificing aesthetics or value. I passed the renderings across the table. Vanessa studied them intently, her eyes widening as she absorbed the sophisticated designs that seamlessly integrated universal accessibility features with contemporary luxury. These are beautiful, she acknowledged, but I don't understand. Are you planning to sell the Henderson house as a model home of some kind? Not exactly, I replied, removing another document from the portfolio. This project has a more personal dimension. Pierce Properties is establishing a foundation focused on supporting single parents and their children through housing security initiatives. The Lakeshore Heights properties will serve as the cornerstone assets for this foundation. I slid the document toward them, the incorporation papers for the Eleanor Pierce Family Foundation, with an initial endowment of $15 million. The foundation will retain ownership of these properties, using the rental income to fund housing grants for single parents pursuing education or career transitions. Thomas stared at the papers, visibly processing the implications. 15 million. These 3 houses don't account for that level of endowment. No, I agreed calmly. The foundation is being funded through a combination of real estate, assets, and liquid investments I've accumulated over the past decade. Vanessa looked up from the documents, her eyes seeking mine. Mom, this is extraordinary. But why didn't you tell us any of this before? The moment had arrived, the IT crux of the lesson I had structured so carefully these past months. Because you never asked, Vanessa. You created a narrative about who I was and what I was capable of that required no verification. You assumed my capabilities ended where your perception placed them. Thomas had the decency to look discomfited. His earlier eagerness to establish synergies now cast in a more transparent light. Vanessa, however, didn't lower her gaze. I thought I was helping you, Vanessa said quietly. I genuinely believed you needed a safety net, and I was trying to create one without hurting your pride. I understand that now, I acknowledged. But good intentions built on false assumptions can still be harmful. Thomas cleared his throat, attempting to steer the conversation back to more comfortable territory. This foundation is a remarkable initiative, Eleanor. Very commendable. I'd be happy to have our legal team review the structure, ensure everything is optimized from a tax perspective. I smiled politely. The foundation has already been established with assistance from Patterson and Mercer. Their nonprofit division has considerable expertise in this area. His expression flickered briefly. Patterson and Mercer was one of the most prestigious firms in the region, far more established than Thomas's employer. Another small recalibration in his assessment of my resources and connections. Of course, he recovered smoothly. They're excellent. I've collaborated with them on several matters. Vanessa set down the foundation documents, her eyes still, studying me with newfound intensity. I keep thinking about all those dinners where I lectured you about retirement planning, and all those times I dismissed your insights about real estate because I assumed you were just an office assistant. How did you not get furious with me? Oh, I did, I admitted candidly. Many times. But anger without purpose accomplishes nothing. I decided that rather than confronting your misconceptions directly, I would simply create a reality so undeniable that no confrontation would be necessary. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Well, mission certainly accomplished there. I don't think either of us will underestimate you again. He laughed, a brittle sound that failed to disguise his discomfort. I'm starting to wonder what other surprises you might have in store. I took a deliberately measured sip of wine before responding. Actually, there is one more matter I'd like to discuss this evening. I reached into my portfolio once more and removed a final document, a property assessment for their home. As you might imagine, my interest in Lakeshore Heights properties extends beyond just the 3 I've acquired. I've had preliminary valuations conducted on all homes in this cul-de-sac. Vanessa's brow furrowed. You had our house appraised? A standard market assessment, I clarified. Nothing invasive, based on public records, comparable sales, and exterior evaluation. According to this analysis, your property has appreciated approximately 14% since purchase, largely due to the improvements in surrounding properties, including those I've acquired. Thomas reached for the assessment, his business, instincts overriding any concerns about propriety. 14% in this market is exceptional. Most properties in the region have seen only single-digit growth. Precisely, I agreed. This brings me to a proposal I'd like you both to consider. I paused, ensuring I had their complete attention. The foundation's model includes provisions for resident caretakers at each property, individuals who maintain the homes and grounds while serving as community liaisons for foundation activities. Vanessa's eyes widened as she began to see where this was heading. Thomas, still scanning the assessment figures, took a moment longer to look up. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to serve as the resident caretakers for the Henderson property, I continued. The position comes with significant benefits, including full use of the property and participation in foundation initiatives. In exchange, you would oversee property maintenance and assist with foundation events several times per year. Complete silence fell over the dining room. Thomas stared at me, his expression a complex mixture of disbelief and calculation. Vanessa seemed equally stunned, though her reaction appeared more emotionally nuanced. You want us to work for you? Thomas finally managed, the concept clearly challenging his entire worldview. I'm offering you an opportunity to be part of something meaningful, I corrected gently. The foundation will support families facing the same challenges I encountered raising Vanessa. Your participation would add valuable perspective and skills. But we have our own home, he objected, gesturing around them. Our careers, our plans. Of course, I acknowledged. This isn't about displacing you from your life. The caretaker role is designed to complement, not replace, existing professional commitments. As for your current home, I glanced down at the assessment. The foundation would be interested in acquiring it at 15% above market value, should you decide to relocate. Thomas's expression shifted rapidly as he processed the financial implications. You're offering to buy our house at a premium and provide us with free accommodation in an even more valuable property? Not free, I corrected. In exchange for specific responsibilities and commitments to the Foundation's mission. And not indefinitely, the arrangement would be structured as a renewable 5-year term, subject to performance review. Vanessa, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. This isn't really about real estate at all, is it? I met her gaze, appreciating her perceptiveness. No, it isn't. It's about values, choices, and the legacy we create through how we live and what we prioritize. You're asking us to choose, she continued, her voice steady, between continuing our current path or joining something larger than ourselves. She glanced at Thomas, whose expression remained focused on the financial calculus rather than the philosophical implications. You're challenging us to reassess what really matters. I'm offering a perspective, I corrected gently. One informed by experience. I spent decades believing that security and comfort for you were the ultimate measures of my success. I poured everything into ensuring you would never face the hardships I encountered. In many ways, I succeeded. You've never known true financial insecurity, never had to choose between education and basic necessities, never worked 3 jobs simultaneously just to keep a roof overhead. Thomas was watching me now, his expression guarded but attentive. But in focusing so singularly on protecting you from material hardship, I continued, addressing Vanessa directly, I may have inadvertently sheltered you from the growth that comes through overcoming challenges, from discovering your own resilience and capacity to create something meaningful from limited resources. So this is what? A corrective lesson? Thomas asked, his tone carefully neutral. It's an invitation. I replied firmly, to consider that perhaps there's more to a successful life than accumulating status markers and seeking constant validation from people who measure worth by zip codes and job titles. The bluntness of my statement hung in the air between us. Thomas looked slightly affronted, but Vanessa nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. The foundation documents mention educational support for single parents, she said. Is that because of your experience? I smiled, pleased, by her focus on substance rather than appearance. Yes. The most significant barrier I faced wasn't just financial hardship. It was the near impossibility of pursuing education while working enough hours to support us both. The foundation will provide housing subsidies specifically structured to reduce working hours without sacrificing security, creating space for educational advancement. That's incredibly thoughtful, Vanessa acknowledged. Addressing the actual problem, not just throwing money at symptoms. Thomas cleared his throat. This is all very admirable, Eleanor, but I think Vanessa and I need time to discuss such a significant proposition privately. It would mean substantial changes to our life plans. Of course, I agreed readily. This isn't a decision to be made impulsively. Take whatever time you need to consider. The foundation launch is scheduled for next month, but the caretaker positions won't be filled until the renovations are completed, likely in early spring. The remainder of the evening progressed with lighter conversation, though an undercurrent of tension remained. Not hostile, but weighty, with unresolved questions and shifting perceptions. When I departed shortly after dessert, Vanessa walked me to my car, momentarily separating us from Thomas. I still can't quite believe all of this, she admitted as we stood in the driveway. Not just the money or the properties, but the vision behind it all. You've been building something remarkable while I've been. She trailed off, searching for words. Living the life you chose, I finished for her. There's no inherent judgment in that, Vanessa. Different paths serve different purposes. But you must have been so disappointed in me, she pressed, her voice catching slightly. Watching me become so focused on appearances, so dismissive of things that didn't fit my narrow definition of success. I considered this carefully before responding. I wasn't disappointed in your achievements or choices. Those are yours to make. What concerned me was seeing you measure your worth, and by extension, mine, through such a limited lens. Success defined only by external validation is inherently unstable. It requires constant reinforcement and leaves little room for genuine fulfillment. She nodded slowly, one hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded abdomen. I keep thinking about the baby, about what values we'll pass down. I don't want my child to grow up thinking their grandmother is just someone to be tolerated or pitied, especially when the reality is so much more inspiring. The sincerity in her voice touched me deeply. For all the careful planning behind my revelations, I hadn't fully anticipated how profoundly it might impact Vanessa's thinking about her own impending parenthood. You'll find your own path as a mother, I assured her. Just remember that children learn more from what we demonstrate than what we declare. Your child will form their understanding of value and worth by observing how you treat others, especially those you perceive as having less power or status than yourself. She absorbed this with a thoughtful expression. I have a lot to reconsider. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how differently the evening had unfolded from my initial expectations. When I had first conceived this plan months ago, I had imagined a more straightforward confrontation of misconceptions, a dramatic revelation that would force Vanessa and Thomas to recognize their errors in judgment. What had emerged instead was something more nuanced, the beginning of a genuine reassessment, rather than simply an embarrassed acknowledgement of mistaken assumptions. The following morning, I attended a scheduled meeting with Martin Caldwell to review progress on our joint ventures. As we examined updated projections for the Lakeshore Heights properties, he studied me with curious amusement. You seem preoccupied. Today, Eleanor. I take it the dinner with your daughter and son-in-law proved interesting. More complicated than I anticipated, I admitted. Vanessa's response was thoughtful, less defensive than I expected. And the son-in-law? Exactly as calculated, I replied dryly, rapidly adjusting his approach to align with his perception of potential advantage. Martin nodded knowingly. Not surprising. The most revealing measure of character is how people treat those they believe can't benefit them. He shuffled through the property reports before adding, "Have you told them about Phase 3 yet?" "No. That revelation needs the right moment, possibly after they've had time to process what they've already learned." Phase 3 represented the culmination of my plan, the acquisition of controlling interest in Meridian Regional Developments, the parent company that owned the entire Lakeshore Heights community. Through careful, private negotiations with principal shareholders, I had secured enough proxy votes to determine the future direction of the development, including covenant enforcement, amenity investments, and expansion planning. In essence, I would soon control not just individual properties within the neighborhood, but the foundational governance of the community itself. This final revelation would complete the reshaping of Vanessa and Thomas's understanding of my position and influence. More importantly, it would give the foundation unprecedented ability to integrate its mission into the community's evolution, creating opportunities for meaningful interaction between residents of vastly different socioeconomic backgrounds. "Well, when you do tell them, I'd appreciate being a fly on the wall," Martin remarked with a chuckle. "Based on what you've shared about your son-in-law, his expression alone would be worth the price of admission." I smiled, but found myself less invested in Thomas's reaction than I might have been weeks earlier. His predictable pivot toward opportunism, when confronted with my actual position, had confirmed everything I had suspected about his character. What interested me more was Vanessa's evolving perspective, the glimmers of reflection I had observed during our conversation about parenting, values. 3 days passed without communication from either Thomas or Vanessa. I continued my normal routine, overseeing Pierce Properties operations, reviewing foundation establishment documents with our legal team, and monitoring the progress of renovations at the Henderson property. The rose garden installation had been completed as scheduled, creating a beautiful transitional space between their property and what would soon become the foundation's showcase home. On the 4th day, I received a text message from Vanessa. "Can we meet just the two of us? Coffee at Lakeside Cafe tomorrow morning?" We arranged to meet at 9, a quiet time at the small cafe overlooking the water. I arrived precisely on time to find Vanessa already seated at a corner table, 2 steaming mugs waiting. She had chosen a location where we were unlikely to encounter her usual social circle, a small detail that suggested this conversation would be genuine rather than performative. "I ordered your usual," she said as I joined her. "Black coffee, no sugar. At least I hope that's still your preference. I realized there are so many basic things about you I've stopped noticing or asking about over the years." "That's still my preference," I confirmed, impressed that she remembered despite our infrequent coffee outings. She nodded, wrapping her hands around her own mug. "Thomas and I have been talking almost constantly since dinner, or rather, talking at each other from completely different perspectives." "I can imagine," I replied neutrally, waiting for her to continue. "He's focused entirely on the financial aspects, calculating the potential benefits of the caretaker arrangement versus maintaining our current position, analyzing whether your foundation connections could advance his career, even researching whether Patterson and Mercer might have openings in their corporate division." She shook her head, a combination of exasperation and resignation in her expression. "It's like he's solving a math problem rather than considering what this means for our family." I sipped my coffee, allowing her the space to process aloud. "And your perspective?" "I keep coming back to one question," she said, meeting my eyes directly. "How did I become someone who would make her own mother sleep on an uncomfortable couch while lecturing her about retirement planning? When did I start seeing you as a problem to manage rather than a person to respect?" The raw honesty in her question caught me off guard. I had prepared for many reactions: defensiveness, grudging acknowledgement, even strategic reconciliation, but not this level of genuine self-examination. "We all develop blind spots, Vanessa, especially when we're heavily invested in particular narratives about ourselves and our place in the world. That's a gracious way of saying I became exactly the kind of person I used to despise, she replied with a sad smile. Remember how I used to rant about Caroline Webster's family in high school? How they treated their housekeeper like she was invisible, talking about her financial struggles right in front of her as if she couldn't hear or understand? I did remember. Teenage Vanessa had been fiercely attuned to injustice, particularly regarding class distinctions and disrespect toward service workers. Somewhere along the way, that sensitivity had been blunted, replaced by the very attitudes she had once criticized. What changed wasn't your capacity for empathy, I suggested gently. It was the context you were operating within. Environments shape us more than we like to admit. The social circles you entered at college and later, through Thomas's connections, reward certain behaviors and perspectives while discouraging others. She considered this, absently tracing the rim of her mug. That's true, but it doesn't excuse it. I made choices every step of the way, about who to befriend, which values to prioritize, how to measure success. Somewhere along the line, I started valuing the approval of people like Charlotte Kingsley and Rebecca Holbrook more than honoring what you'd taught me about treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances. Charlotte and Rebecca were prominent figures in Vanessa's current social circle, wives of Thomas's colleagues, women whose family wealth stretched back generations and whose lives revolved around carefully calibrated displays of status and influence. It's never too late to reassess those choices, I observed. Particularly with a child on the way, becoming a parent has a way of crystallizing what truly matters. Vanessa's hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen, a gesture that was becoming habitual. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you alone. Thomas and I aren't seeing eye to eye on your proposal, and I needed to sort through my own thoughts without his input. I understand. These decisions are significant. The thing is, she continued, leaning forward slightly, Thomas sees the foundation offer purely in terms of financial advantage and networking opportunities. He's already talking about how we could leverage the caretaker position to make connections with foundation donors while maintaining our real career trajectories. Her use of air quotes around real suggested a growing distance between her perspective and Thomas's, a development I hadn't anticipated but found intriguing. And you see it differently? I prompted. I keep thinking about what you said. About creating something meaningful rather than just accumulating status markers. She took a deep breath. The truth is, Mom, I'm not happy. I haven't been for some time. My job at Meridian is prestigious and pays well, but the work itself feels hollow. My social circle is exhausting. Constant competition thinly veiled as friendship. Even our home, for all its impressive features, has never felt like a place I can truly exhale. This level of candor between us was unprecedented in recent years. I found myself moved by her willingness to articulate these doubts, especially given how carefully she had constructed the appearance of satisfaction with her chosen path. What would make you happy, Vanessa? I asked simply. She laughed softly, a slightly helpless sound. That's the terrifying part. I don't know anymore. I've been so focused on checking boxes and reaching benchmarks that I've lost track of what actually brings me joy or satisfaction. She hesitated, then added more quietly, but I do know that when I first heard about your foundation, about creating housing security for single parents pursuing education, something resonated. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely inspired rather than just impressed. The foundation would certainly benefit from your financial expertise, I noted. Understanding complex financial systems from the inside is invaluable when designing programs to help people navigate those same systems. That's just it, she said, her expression brightening. I've been thinking, my background in financial analysis could be redirected toward developing educational programs for the foundation, teaching financial literacy, helping participants create sustainable budgets, navigate lending systems, build credit responsibly. The animation in her voice and expression as she described these possibilities revealed more than any explicit declaration could have. This wasn't merely a strategic pivot. This was genuine enthusiasm for meaningful application of her skills. That would be an extraordinary contribution, I acknowledged, particularly coming from someone who understands both the technical aspects and the practical challenges. The problem is Thomas, she continued, her enthusiasm dimming slightly. He sees any deviation from our current trajectory as failure, almost, admitting defeat. He keeps saying we've worked too hard to throw it all away on charity work, as if helping others somehow diminishes us. I chose my words carefully, aware of the delicate balance between supporting my daughter and respecting the complexity of her marriage. Different people find fulfillment through different avenues, Vanessa. Thomas's perspective isn't inherently wrong. It's simply aligned with values that prioritize individual achievement and conventional measures of success. But that's not enough for me anymore, she replied with quiet certainty. Especially not now, thinking about the kind of parent I want to be, the example I want to set. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I want to accept your offer, Mom. Not just for the financial advantages or the beautiful property, but because I believe in what you're building. I want to be part of it, contribute to it, help shape it. And Thomas? She sighed, running a hand through her hair in a gesture, reminiscent of her teenage years. I don't know. We're at an impasse. He says he won't downgrade our life for what he calls my sudden crisis of conscience. I've tried explaining that this isn't about downgrading anything. It's about redirecting our energy towards something more meaningful. But he's fixated on how it would look to his colleagues, what his parents would say. This tension between them presented both challenges and opportunities for my broader objectives. While I had no desire to create discord in their marriage, I recognized that Vanessa was articulating a genuine evolutionary shift in her values, one that aligned with the Foundation's mission in ways that could be profoundly beneficial for both her personal growth and the initiative's success. These transitions are rarely smooth, I acknowledged, particularly when partners find themselves moving at different paces or in different directions. But remember that accepting the caretaker position doesn't require abandoning your current circumstances immediately. It could be structured as a gradual transition, maintaining your existing home and positions while incrementally increasing your involvement with the Foundation. A phased approach, she mused, considering. That might be easier for Thomas to accept. He responds better to incremental changes than dramatic pivots. Exactly. And it would give both of you time to evaluate whether the Foundation work brings the fulfillment you're seeking. Vanessa nodded, a new determination settling in her expression. I'd like to visit the Foundation offices, learn more about the specific initiatives. If I'm going to convince Thomas this is worthwhile, I need to understand every aspect thoroughly. I'd be happy to arrange that, I replied, pleased by her proactive approach. The team is still small but growing. We've recently hired a program director with extensive experience in nonprofit housing initiatives. Her perspective would be particularly valuable as you consider how your skills might complement existing efforts. As our coffee meeting extended into a second hour, I observed a quality in Vanessa I hadn't seen in years: genuine intellectual engagement unclouded by status concerns or performative gestures. She asked insightful questions about the Foundation's structure, funding mechanisms, and program evaluation metrics. Her analytical mind, so often directed toward career advancement and social positioning, was now focused on understanding systemic approaches to addressing housing insecurity. When we finally parted, she hugged me. A real embrace rather than the perfunctory air kisses that had become our norm. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for the Foundation opportunity, but for not giving up on me even when I was at my most insufferable. "You're my daughter," I replied. "That doesn't change based on circumstances or misunderstandings." As I watched her walk to her car, I reflected on how differently this plan was unfolding than I had initially envisioned. What had begun as a lesson in humility and perspective had evolved into something more profound, potentially a genuine redirection in Vanessa's life course. Whether Thomas would adapt to this evolution remained to be seen, but I found myself more invested in supporting Vanessa's emerging clarity than in orchestrating further revelations or confrontations. The following week brought rapid developments on multiple fronts. The final paperwork for the Meridian Regional Development's acquisition was completed. I now effectively controlled the parent company of Lakeshore Heights. The foundation offices were established in a renovated historic building downtown, creating a professional but welcoming environment for staff and program participants alike. And most significantly, Vanessa began spending her lunch hours and occasional afternoons at the foundation, learning about operations and developing proposals for financial education components. Thomas maintained a careful distance from these developments, neither actively supporting Vanessa's involvement nor explicitly opposing it. According to Vanessa, he had adopted a wait-and-see approach, privately skeptical but unwilling to directly challenge something that now clearly mattered to his pregnant wife. On Friday afternoon, as I reviewed architectural plans for converting part of the colonial property into a community space for foundation participants, my assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Thomas Bennett, without Vanessa. He entered my office with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention in professional settings, though I detected an underlying tension in his posture. "Eleanor," he greeted me with practiced warmth, accepting my invitation to sit. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was downtown for a meeting and thought I'd stop by rather than calling." "Not at all," I replied, setting aside the plans. "What can I do for you, Thomas?" He glanced around my office, tastefully appointed but deliberately understated, with framed photographs of significant Pierce Properties developments rather than personal accolades or status symbols. "I've been thinking about our dinner conversation, about the foundation and the caretaker proposition." I gathered as much from Vanessa. She mentioned you two were still discussing the possibilities. He smiled tightly. "Vanessa is very enthusiastic. It's admirable, really, how quickly she's embraced this new direction." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I've been more measured in my response, wanting to ensure we're making decisions based on complete information rather than emotional reactions. "A prudent approach," I acknowledged. "Major life changes should never be undertaken impulsively." This validation seemed to embolden him. "Exactly my thinking, which is why I wanted to speak with you directly, professional to professional." He leaned forward slightly. "Vanessa sees this foundation work through an idealistic lens. It's touching, but not necessarily practical for our long-term goals." "And those goals are?" "Career advancement, financial security, social positioning. That benefits our child's future opportunities." He stated these as self-evident truths. "We've worked incredibly hard to establish ourselves in circles that can provide lifelong advantages for our family." I nodded, allowing him to continue without interruption. "That said," he continued, his tone shifting to one I recognized from business negotiations, "I see genuine value in maintaining strong connections with the foundation. Your network of donors alone represents significant potential for my professional development." And there it was, the transactional calculation I had anticipated from the beginning. "So you're proposing," I prompted, "a compromise. Rather than the full caretaker role, which would require substantial time commitments from both of us, perhaps Vanessa could serve in an advisory capacity, leveraging her financial expertise without disrupting our current positions. Meanwhile, I could offer legal consultation on an as-needed basis." It was a carefully constructed counteroffer, designed to maintain the appearance of participation while minimizing actual commitment or lifestyle adjustment. Perfectly in character for the Thomas I had come to know. An interesting suggestion, I replied neutrally. And how does Vanessa feel about this alternative approach? A flicker of discomfort crossed his expression. We haven't discussed the specifics yet. I wanted to explore the possibility with you first, establish whether such an arrangement would satisfy the Foundation's needs. Translation. He was attempting to circumvent Vanessa's growing enthusiasm by establishing a more limited commitment framework with me directly. I appreciate your thoughtful consideration, I said carefully. However, the caretaker positions are integral to the Foundation's ethos, not just administrative roles, but embodiments of our commitment to creating genuine community within these properties. They require physical presence and authentic engagement, not just occasional consultation. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I understand the vision, Eleanor, truly. But surely there's room for pragmatic adjustments? After all, wouldn't the Foundation benefit more from our professional expertise than from having us physically present in the Henderson house? The Foundation needs both, I replied simply. There are plenty of professionals who can provide occasional consultation. What's rarer are individuals willing to live their values daily, demonstrating through consistent action what meaningful community engagement looks like. Thomas sat back slightly, reassessing. I see. So, the caretaker role is non-negotiable in its current form. The fundamental components are, yes, though there's certainly flexibility in how specific responsibilities are structured. He nodded slowly, processing this boundary. Then I should be transparent about my concerns. While I admire what you've built, Eleanor, I have reservations about tying our family's future so directly to a foundation. Nonprofits are notoriously unstable, dependent on donor whims, vulnerable to economic fluctuations, subject to shifting political winds. Valid considerations for traditional nonprofits, I acknowledged. However, the Eleanor Pierce Family Foundation is structured differently. Our endowment is primarily derived from income-generating real estate assets, creating a self-sustaining, financial base independent of donor contributions. This reminder of the Foundation's financial stability, and by extension my own, seemed to recalibrate his approach once again. Well, that's certainly reassuring, he admitted. Still, there's the matter of our professional trajectories. Vanessa has been on track for a senior leadership position at Meridian Financial. My own partnership prospects at the firm are promising. The caretaker role would necessitate scaling back these pursuits. Not necessarily, I countered. The role requires presence and engagement, not complete career redirection. Many of our most effective community leaders maintain professional identities beyond their foundation work. Thomas studied me, clearly trying to determine whether further negotiation would be productive. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've considered many possibilities, I replied evenly. Just as you're doing now. He chuckled, a sound with little actual humor. Vanessa keeps saying I'm overthinking this, that sometimes the right choice isn't the one that maximizes financial return or career advancement. She might be onto something, I suggested mildly. He stood, smoothing his already impeccable suit jacket. Well, I should get back to the office. Thank you for hearing me out, Eleanor. I'll continue discussing options with Vanessa. As he reached the door, he paused, turning back with a carefully casual expression. By the way, I've been curious. There are rumors circulating about Meridian Regional Developments undergoing some kind of ownership restructuring. Since they manage Lakeshore Heights, I've been wondering if you've heard anything through your real estate channels. And there it was, the real purpose behind his unscheduled visit. Despite all his strategic calculations about the foundation offer, he remained completely unaware that his comfortable world at Lakeshore Heights would soon be directly under my influence. The final revelation still awaited its perfect moment. Corporate restructuring happens regularly in development firms, I replied non-committally. If I hear anything concrete, I'll certainly let you know. He nodded, satisfied with what he perceived as a casual information exchange, rather than a deliberate omission. After Thomas departed, I sat quietly in my office, considering the contrasting approaches of daughter and son-in-law. Vanessa's genuine evolution toward meaningful engagement stood in stark contrast to Thomas's persistent focus on extracting maximum advantage with minimum disruption to his carefully constructed life plan. The question now was whether these divergent perspectives could find sustainable common ground, and what role my final revelation would play in either bridging or widening that gap. The foundation gala arrived on a perfect autumn evening, the colonial property transformed into a showcase for our vision. Golden light spilled from every window, and carefully placed lanterns illuminated the garden paths where guests would soon gather. I arrived early to oversee final preparations, ensuring every detail reflected the dignity and warmth central to our mission. As I adjusted a display highlighting our housing security programs, I spotted Vanessa arriving alone. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her pregnancy now visibly showing at 5 months. Her expression carried a quiet determination I recognized from her childhood, the look she wore when she had made an important decision. Thomas is coming separately, she explained, anticipating my question. He had a client meeting that ran late. At least that's what he said. Her tone suggested skepticism. We had another conversation about the foundation this morning. It didn't go well. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, genuinely concerned despite my complicated feelings about Thomas. Has his position changed at all? Not meaningfully. He keeps trying to negotiate a compromise where I maintain a respectable career while volunteering occasionally with the foundation. She shook her head. He doesn't understand that this isn't about balancing commitments. It's about fundamental values and where I want to direct my energy. Her clarity surprised and moved me. The daughter who had once been so consumed with external validation had discovered an internal compass that transcended social positioning. You've changed, I observed softly. I've remembered, she corrected. The person I was becoming before I got caught up in proving my worth through achievements and associations. She glanced around the foundation space. What you've built? Here. It's not just about housing or education. It's about restoring dignity and possibility to people society often dismisses. That's what I want my child to understand about success. As guests began arriving, we separated to fulfill our hosting duties. I greeted community leaders and potential partners, while Vanessa welcomed neighbors from Lakeshore Heights who had accepted our invitation. Many arrived with visible curiosity about my sudden prominence in local development circles. The housekeeper's daughter they had politely tolerated now revealed as a significant property owner and foundation founder. Thomas arrived 45 minutes late, impeccably dressed and projecting confident ease despite his delayed appearance. He approached Vanessa with a carefully composed smile, though I noticed the tension between them in their brief exchange. When he greeted me, his demeanor was similarly controlled. Eleanor, the transformation of this property is remarkable. Very impressive vision. Thank you, Thomas. I hope you'll find tonight's announcements equally compelling. A flicker of wariness crossed his expression. Announcements? Beyond the foundation launch? All in good time, I replied with a gentle smile. The formal program will begin shortly. As guests settled into their seats for my presentation, I took a moment to observe the gathering. The deliberate blend of affluent Lakeshore Heights, residents alongside community organizers, educators, and potential program participants physically embodied the integration we hoped to foster. Different worlds intersecting in meaningful exchange rather than remaining comfortably separate. Thank you all for joining us this evening, I began, to celebrate the official launch of the Eleanor Pierce Family Foundation. While our legal establishment was completed months ago, tonight marks our public introduction and the unveiling of our comprehensive mission. I outlined our core initiatives: housing security for single parents pursuing education, financial literacy integrated with practical support, community-centered design principles fostering genuine connection. Throughout this portion, I noticed Thomas maintaining a politely interested expression while subtly scanning the room, noting which influential figures were present. These initiatives reflect personal experience as much as professional expertise, I continued. Many of you know pieces of my story. Raising Vanessa as a single parent while working multiple jobs, sacrificing immediate comfort for long-term security, eventually building a successful real estate enterprise through persistence and strategic vision. I glanced toward Vanessa, whose expression conveyed pride and newfound understanding. Tonight, I'm pleased to share a significant development that will expand our foundation's capacity to fulfill its mission. Pierce Properties has secured controlling interest in Meridian Regional Developments, the parent company responsible for Lakeshore Heights and several other residential communities throughout our region. An audible wave of reaction swept through the room. Several Lakeshore Heights residents exchanged startled glances, whispering behind program booklets. Thomas's carefully maintained expression faltered, surprise and rapid calculation visibly competing across his features. This acquisition allows the foundation to implement integrated housing approaches across diverse communities, maintaining the quality and character of existing developments while introducing thoughtfully designed affordable components in future phases. I detailed specific plans for each affected community, emphasizing continuity for current residents while outlining gradual integration of foundation initiatives. Throughout this portion, I deliberately avoided looking directly at Thomas, allowing him space to process this revelation without additional pressure. Central to our approach is the resident caretaker model, I continued. Each foundation property will be maintained by individuals who embody our mission, not just managing physical spaces, but actively building bridges between diverse community members, demonstrating through daily living what meaningful integration looks like in practice. I paused, then added, I'm delighted to announce that our first resident caretaker partnership has been confirmed. Vanessa Bennett, my daughter, will be applying her financial expertise to develop and implement our financial literacy initiatives while serving as resident caretaker for the Henderson property adjacent to her current home. This announcement generated warm applause. Thomas, however, visibly stiffened, his gaze darting to Vanessa in apparent surprise. She had clearly not informed him of her decision to accept the position formally. As the presentation concluded and guests began exploring the exhibits throughout the house, I observed Thomas immediately drawing Vanessa aside, his expression tightly controlled, but his body language conveying unmistakable tension. Their conversation appeared intense but brief, ending with Vanessa shaking her head firmly before returning to speak with waiting guests. For the next hour, I circulated among attendees, answering questions and accepting congratulations. Throughout this period, I noticed Thomas engaged in animated conversation with several influential guests, including banking executives whose institutions partnered with Meridian on development financing. His adaptability was impressive, if calculating. Having absorbed the shock of the Meridian revelation, he had immediately pivoted to leveraging this new information for potential advantage. Vanessa, meanwhile, moved through the gathering with genuine engagement, introducing community partners to Lakeshore Heights neighbors, explaining curriculum models to interested educators, embodying the bridge-building role she had committed to assuming. As the evening wound down, I found myself momentarily alone near the display outlining our affordable housing integration model. Thomas approached, his expression carefully neutral. "Eleanor, may I have a word?" "Of course," I replied, guiding him toward a quieter corner. "The Meridian acquisition was quite a revelation," he began, his tone measured. "You've positioned yourself to fundamentally reshape the community's development trajectory. The foundation's mission requires systemic approaches, not just individual interventions, I explained. Integrated control allows more effective implementation. He nodded, maintaining his composed expression. Vanessa seems determined to proceed with this caretaker role, despite our conversations about balancing it with her established career path. She's found work that genuinely resonates with her values, I observed. That's a precious discovery many people never make. With respect, Eleanor, you've essentially upended our carefully constructed life plan, he replied, an edge entering, his voice despite his effort at control. The position at Meridian Financial, our standing in Lakeshore Heights, the connections we've cultivated, these aren't trivial matters to simply discard for a well-intentioned charitable project. I understand they feel significant, I acknowledged. But perhaps the question isn't what might be lost, but what could be gained through a different measure of value and success. His expression tightened. That's a conveniently philosophical perspective from someone who's already achieved conventional success. You've built wealth and influence before choosing this altruistic pivot. Vanessa and I are still establishing ourselves. Actually, Thomas, I never separated those objectives the way you describe, I corrected gently. Even while building Pierce Properties, my decisions were guided by values beyond profit maximization. The foundation is an extension of that approach, not a rejection of previous success. Before he could respond, Vanessa joined us, having completed her conversations with departing guests. The last group just left, she reported. Several neighbors asked about volunteer opportunities, including Susan Hargrove, who always seemed so dismissive of community outreach before. Thomas attempted to match her positive energy. Yes, you were quite persuasive with the financial literacy presentation. He paused, then added with forced casualness, We should head home. We have that brunch tomorrow with my firm's partners. Vanessa's expression shifted. I told you yesterday, Thomas, I'm not attending. I have a meeting with the curriculum development team to finalize the first workshop modules. Vanessa, this brunch has been scheduled for months. The senior partners are expecting us, he insisted, his composure beginning to crack. And I've made a commitment to the foundation team, she replied firmly. My priorities have changed. I thought I'd made that clear. Their exchange had attracted subtle attention from remaining staff, prompting Thomas to modulate his reaction. We'll discuss this at home, he said tightly. There's nothing to discuss, Vanessa responded with calm certainty. I've made my decision about where my energy and commitment belong going forward. Thomas turned to me, barely containing his frustration. Eleanor, perhaps you could explain to Vanessa that abruptly abandoning professional obligations isn't how successful people operate. I don't presume to dictate Vanessa's choices, I replied evenly. She's demonstrated remarkable clarity about her values and priorities. That's not abandonment, it's alignment. The three of us stood in momentary impasse, the foundation space now quiet except for staff discreetly clearing refreshment tables. The tension was broken by Vanessa's sudden intake of breath, her hand moving to her abdomen. The baby's kicking, she explained, a smile transforming her expression. Here, feel. She reached for my hand first, placing it where the movement was strongest. The flutter against my palm created an instant connection to this new life. My grandchild, who would grow up in circumstances so different from what either Vanessa or I had experienced. Thomas? She offered, extending her other hand toward him. He hesitated, his expression conflicted. For a moment, I glimpsed the genuine battle occurring within him, between the carefully constructed life plan he'd been pursuing and the unmistakable reality of impending fatherhood within a changing family dynamic. Slowly, he placed his hand beside mine. When he felt the movement, something shifted in his expression. A softening, a momentary transcendence of the calculations and positioning that had dominated his approach. That's remarkable, he said quietly. This is what matters, Thomas, Vanessa said gently. Not brunch with partners, not neighborhood status, not even career trajectories. This child deserves parents who live with authenticity and purpose, who demonstrate through daily choices what truly constitutes a successful life. In that moment, watching them connected through this new life, I recognized that my elaborate plan had evolved far beyond its original purpose. What had begun as a lesson in perspective had catalyzed profound reassessment for Vanessa, and potentially for Thomas as well. 3 months later, the Henderson property renovation was complete, transformed into both a showcase for the foundation's approach to dignified, integrated housing and a comfortable home awaiting its resident. Caretakers. The rose garden along the property line had flourished despite the winter season, with early bulbs already pushing through the carefully prepared soil. I stood on the back patio, reviewing the property manager's final checklist, when Vanessa arrived carrying a small box. "The last of the nursery items," she explained, setting it down carefully. "Everything else is already arranged." Her pregnancy was now in its 8th month, her movements deliberate but energetic. The transformation in her extended beyond the physical. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that reflected inner alignment rather than external validation. "How does it feel?" I asked, "making this transition official?" "Right," she replied simply, "despite all the complications." The complications she referenced had been substantial. Following the foundation gala, she and Thomas had endured weeks of intense conversation about their future. His initial resistance had gradually evolved into reluctant acceptance, then cautious engagement with the foundation's mission. "Thomas is meeting with the financial planning team this afternoon," she continued. "He's actually developed some innovative approaches to integrating credit counseling with the housing security program." This represented significant evolution from his initial stance. While their marriage remained a work in progress, Thomas had begun applying his professional expertise to foundation initiatives, finding unexpected satisfaction in work that served genuine needs rather than simply accumulating wealthy clients. "And the house?" I inquired, referring to their original Lakeshore Heights property. "Listed yesterday," she confirmed. "We're not rushing the sale, but it feels increasingly unnecessary to maintain 2 homes so close together." This decision, to eventually sell their showcase home and fully commit to the caretaker residence, marked perhaps the most significant indicator of their changing priorities. The property that had once represented their arrival in exclusive social circles would soon become another family's home, while they embraced a role centered on community building rather than status maintenance. As we walked through the completed caretaker residence, with its thoughtfully designed spaces balancing beauty and functionality, I reflected on how differently events had unfolded from my initial expectations. What had begun as a lesson in perspective for a daughter who had underestimated her mother had evolved into profound reassessment of values for an entire family. "I never imagined sleeping on your couch would lead to all this," I observed, smiling at the memory of those uncomfortable visits. Vanessa laughed, resting her hand on her rounded abdomen. "I was so caught up in appearances, so determined to project the perfect life that I couldn't see what actually constituted a meaningful one. And now? Now I understand what you've known all along, that true success isn't measured by addresses or job titles or social connections. It's measured by alignment between values and actions, by contributions that outlast our individual circumstances." She gestured toward the foundation materials displayed in the home office, where both she and Thomas would develop programs to support participants. "This child will grow up understanding worth beyond wealth, success beyond status, community beyond convenience. That's the true inheritance, far more valuable than any property deeds or trust funds." As I prepared to leave, Vanessa walked me to my car. The street looked much as it had when my plan began. Manicured lawns, impressive facades, careful curation of external perfection. Yet beneath this unchanged appearance, fundamental shifts had occurred in how one family defined belonging, success, and purpose. You know what's ironic? Vanessa mused, looking back at the Henderson property that would soon become their home. You bought these houses to teach me a lesson about misjudging you. But the real lesson wasn't about your capabilities at all. No, I prompted, curious about her insight. It was about the limitations of the measuring stick I'd been using. For everyone, myself included. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. Sometimes the most valuable thing a parent can give isn't financial security or social advantage, but the courage to question whether we're pursuing what genuinely matters. I hugged her goodbye, this daughter who had once relegated me to the couch while lecturing about retirement planning. Now she stood as a partner in building something meaningful. Her priorities fundamentally realigned through experiences that had challenged her most basic assumptions about success and worth. As I drove away, I reflected that the true outcome of my property acquisitions wasn't the restoration of my dignity in my daughter's eyes, though that had certainly occurred. The deeper result was Vanessa's discovery of her own dignity, separate from external validation or social positioning. In finding her authentic purpose, she had finally claimed the most valuable inheritance I could offer. Not financial resources, but the courage to measure success by contribution rather than consumption. The couch that had once symbolized my marginalization in her life had become the catalyst for transformation. Neither of us could have anticipated when this journey began. Sometimes the most powerful lessons emerge from the spaces where we are most uncomfortable, whether sleeping on lumpy cushions or questioning our most fundamental assumptions about what constitutes a life well lived. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.